The ocean can be a solitary, lonely place to be. It is unforgiving and harsh, unaware of the humans and ships crossing its vast distances. Throughout history, there have been those who have been drawn to the mystery and adventure, the unknown, and the glory of life at sea. Some cannot seem to escape its allure. Many lives have been lost at sea, some as a result of accidents, and others very much intentionally. War, accidents, poor judgment, and even murder have claimed countless numbers of souls who now lie permanently at the bottom of the world's oceans. Perhaps these souls are drawn to the sea, so much so they cannot escape its grasp, even in death. You may not believe in ghosts or spirits, but the question you have to ask yourself is, do they believe in you? Welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, Tales of Mishaps, Misfortune, and Misadventures, Halloween Edition. Thank you so much for joining me and continuing to support the podcast. The next two episodes will not be usual episodes, but we'll still have maritime-related stories, only with a supernatural twist. Come aboard with me, gather your courage, and let's get spooky. Our first story is possibly the most disturbing and unexplained ghost ship of all time. This is the story of the Ourang Medan. Details of this story have been repeated and sometimes added to over the last 75 years or so, leading some to believe the story is an urban legend. Others insist it's true. The story begins on June 27, 1947, or possibly February of 1948, as there are conflicting dates. The Dutch freighter Ourang Medan was operating in the Strait of Malacca, between Sumatra and Indonesia. Suddenly, a distress call went out from the ship in Morse code. SOS, SOS. Then, moments later, send a doctor. This message was received by two nearby ships, the City of Baltimore and the American steamboat Silver Star. It was a curious and unusual distress call. The Silver Star responded to the Ourang Medan and received a reply back. Position 179 degrees west and 20 degrees south. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. Moments later, another message came through from the Ourang Medan. It was just two simple words. I die. All further attempts to communicate with the Ourang Medan failed. The Silver Star was about 200 nautical miles from the reported position and set its course to intercept the Ourang Medan. It would take 19 hours to reach her. During this time, the Silver Star stayed in communication with the City of Baltimore, which was about 800 nautical miles away from the Ourang Medan. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the Silver Star saw something on the horizon. It was the Ourang Medan. The ship was dead in the water, with no signs of activity. Other than a very slight list to starboard, there were no signs of distress. No smoke from the chimneys. No whistles or alarms sounding. No flags flying. The Silver Star approached closer, circling the ship as it sounded its horn, requesting a response from the ship. But there was nothing. As the Silver Star moved closer, its crew noticed a lifeboat was missing, and it looked as if it had been recently lowered to the water. But still, no signs of any crew were observed. Attempting to make contact, the crew used a megaphone, shouting to the Ourang Medan. After again receiving no response, the Silver Star sent a launch with 9 men and an officer to investigate. After boarding the large steamer, the men saw nothing and heard nothing. There should have been a sizable crew on board a ship this size. The men cautiously made their way to the upper deck, where they found the bodies of several crew members. They appeared to be frozen in time, with looks of shock and terror on their faces, with arms held out as if they were reaching for something. Moving to the radio room, they discovered the radio operator who they had just spoken to the day before. He was also dead, in panic-stricken agony. All of the crew members on board were found in this same state. Upon further inspection, the men discovered no external injuries on the bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, and no murder weapons. Hoping to discover what had happened, the men looked for the ship's log and papers, but these were nowhere to be found. Whoever removed them must be the same person, or people, who escaped in the missing lifeboat. Visual inspection of the surrounding waters revealed no such lifeboat. At this time, the men started smelling a suspicious odor on board and were ordered to leave the ship and return to the Silver Star. The captain ordered the Ourang Medan to be towed back to port, but just at that moment, a fire erupted in number 4 hold on the lifeless ship. Then suddenly, the Ourang Medan exploded in a series of violent blasts. The hulking ship was set ablaze while the crew of the Silver Star watched helplessly. Any hopes of discovering what happened on the ship had disappeared. The ship continued to burn until it listed fully on its side, and finally slipped under the surface. It is believed to be lying on the bottom of the ocean at a depth of 5,000 meters. The captain of the Silver Star wrote of this incident in his ship's log, hypothesizing the ship was full of flammable chemicals or possibly weapons or explosives. 3 weeks later, a lifeboat carrying 7 passengers washed up on the beaches of Taongi, a small island of the Marshall Islands. 6 of the passengers were dead. The only survivor was the second officer of the Ourang Medan, who went by the name Jerry Rabbit. He claimed he was recruited by the Ourang Medan while it was in port in Shanghai, and many of the crew were recruited in the same manner. Strangely, he also reported that he and many of the other crew were not asked to show any identification or other documentation, and the ship used to be a Chinese cargo and troop ship. According to this man, Jerry Rabbit, the Ourang Medan took 7,000 boxes of chemicals on board the night before it departed, and another 8,000 boxes at a stop 80 miles south of Shanghai. He believed the cargo they were carrying was to be offloaded to another ship in Costa Rica. The Ourang Medan was also not traveling in the usual shipping routes, choosing routes that were a little less traveled. Rabbit reported that the stokers in the engine room, the men who keep the boilers operating, all developed an illness and fell dead. With no other explanation, the captain of the Ourang Medan declared their deaths to be due to heat stroke. Soon, all the crew in the engine room became ill, complaining of horrific stomach pains and cramps. Rabbit searched the papers on the ship and discovered it was carrying 15,000 crates of cyanide, sulfuric acid, and nitroglycerin. Frustrated with the captain for not requesting emergency assistance, Rabbit fled the ship with 6 others on a lifeboat. With no fresh water and no provisions, those 6 other men died in the intense tropical heat. Jerry Rabbit, the last known person who could shed light on the ghost ship, died just a few days later. Much of this was reported in a now declassified letter from C. H. Mark, Jr., the assistant of the director of the CIA, Allen Dulles, to an unknown person in the CIA. Mark states the incident with the Ourang Medan may be a clue to why other ships and planes have disappeared at sea. This document was classified until 2003 and portions remain redacted even today. Mark received a reply to his letter. Quote, "Although we are unable to answer your questions, your letter is very interesting, and we appreciate your concern in these matters." There are newspaper accounts reporting the event, including 3 articles in 1948 from the Dutch Indonesian newspaper, The Locomotive. Others were written in the San Francisco Examiner and Atlanta Constitution in 1948. A May 1952 article in the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council of the United States Coast Guard, entitled "We Sail Together," also included the story of the Ourang Medan, stating, quote, "There were dead men everywhere. Bodies were strewn about the decks, in the passageways, in the chart house, on the bridge. Sprawled on their backs, their frozen faces upturned to the sun with mouths gaping open, and their eyes staring. The dead bodies resembled caricatures. To this day, there is no explanation offered as to what might have happened to the ship's company." End quote. If the ship was carrying poisonous gas, it is quite possible these reports are true. Strangely, there is no record of the Ourang Medan in Lloyd's ship registry, adding to the doubts of this story. However, if Jerry Rabbit is to be believed, this ship might have been an unregistered ship conducting clandestine operations of some kind, for an unknown purpose. So is this story of mysterious deaths true? Or is it an urban legend? Was this man, Jerry Rabbit, his real name? Was he right about the poisonous substances on board? If so, could it produce such a horrifying death scene? Did Jerry Rabbit even exist? If this is an urban legend, where did it come from? And why create such a story? Some theories about the Ourang Medan include encounters with UFOs, aliens, even sea monsters. We will never know for certain what happened to the horror-stricken crew of the Ourang Medan as they died. One last point to ponder. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 mysteriously vanished in 2014 over the Strait of Malacca, near the location of the sinking of the Ourang Medan. Time to crawl under the covers and pull the sheets up over your eyes. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs will be right back with another chilling tale after this sponsor break. Lighthouses are known all over the world as helpful, even life-saving beacons to guide ships away from rocky coasts and dangerous shoals. The first known lighthouse was the Pharos of Alexandria, built by Ptolemy I and Ptolemy II between 300 and 280 BC. Since then, humans have been tending to them, keeping them alight, and making sure the lights do not go out. But the job of a lighthouse keeper is lonely, often requiring many days or weeks in a confined space. Some have even had trouble keeping their sanity. Others have never left their post, even after death. St. Augustine, Florida, is the oldest continually inhabited settlement in the United States. The Spanish settled in St. Augustine in 1565 and was founded by Pedro Menendez de Aviles. It briefly came under English control in 1763, and one of the first English ships sent to St. Augustine sank just off the coast from the lighthouse. The Spanish regained control of the town in 1783, and in 1819, the Adams-Onis Treaty ceded Florida to the United States in exchange for $5 million. Of course, Florida belonged to its indigenous peoples long before any Europeans set foot on the peninsula. The first lighthouse built by Americans in St. Augustine was built in 1824. but it was built too close to the water, and it gradually fell into disrepair. In 1859, the lightkeeper of the original lighthouse, Joseph Andrew, fell to his death while whitewashing the outside of the tower when the scaffold he was using gave way. His obituary in the St. Augustine Examiner read, "He first struck the roof of the oil room about 30 feet below, whence he glanced off and struck the stone wall which encloses the lighthouse, and thence to the ground, a stone pavement." In 1860, his wife, Maria Mestre de las Dolores Andrew, became the first woman keeper of a lighthouse in Florida, and the first Hispanic-American woman to be in charge of a federal shore installation. She is honored as the first female employee of the United States Coast Guard. Today, the image of Joseph Andrew and a woman in a long white dress, thought to be his wife Maria, have often been seen pacing the lighthouse tower. A locked door at the top of the lighthouse has been found numerous times early in the morning with its padlock unlocked and the door ajar. The alarm for this door was mysteriously not triggered. The original lighthouse fell into the sea in 1880. But are the ghosts of Joseph and Maria still looking for their lost lighthouse tower? A new St. Augustine Lighthouse was commissioned in 1871 to be built on top of an older structure built by the Spanish 300 years earlier. This lighthouse would be at a higher elevation, about 300 yards from the original lighthouse. In charge of the construction was Hezekiah Pittee, who moved his family to St. Augustine from Maine. Hezekiah, his wife Mary, and his 3 children, Mary Adelaide, Eliza, and Carrie, lived at the lighthouse during construction. The children filled their days playing in and around the lighthouse, despite the messy construction. The new lighthouse tower was to be 160 feet in height when completed, but by 1873, only the foundation and 42 feet of the tower had been completed. Supplies and materials for the lighthouse were sent via railway cart, and the children quickly discovered the joy and splendor of riding this cart down to the water. They rode the cart over and over, down to the water, back up again. At the very end of the railway, a piece of wood was barred across the track to stop the car from plunging into the water. On the afternoon of July 10th, 1873, the 3 girls were playing as usual and were joined by an African-American girl named Ellie, or Eleanor, whose father worked on the construction site. When the girls happily rode the cart down to the water on this day, the wooden board was not in place. The cart raced down the rail track, and when the car reached the end of the track, the girls tumbled into the water with the cart on top of them. One of the young men working on the site, Mr. Dan Sessions, saw the girls fly into the water, and he quickly sprung into action. When he pulled the cart away, the 3 oldest girls, Mary, Eliza, and Eleanor, were already dead. Carrie, just aged 4, survived. Construction was halted. The town of St. Augustine went into mourning over the loss of the girls. After their deaths, strange occurrences began to be reported in and around the lighthouse. There were many reports of hearing giggling and laughing from young girls, as if they were playing together. An assistant lighthouse keeper in the 1950s reported hearing footsteps, but never saw anyone in the staircase. The head lighthouse keeper at the time was James Pippin, and he was the very last lighthouse keeper to live at the lighthouse. However, Pippin moved out of the lighthouse to another building claiming, "That house was haunted. I will not stay another night in it." The lighthouse was automated in 1955, and a live-in lighthouse keeper was no longer required. The lighthouse keeper's former house was rented to a local man who claimed he woke up and saw a small girl standing next to his bed. But just a moment later, she was gone. The lighthouse was unoccupied for years when the lighthouse keeper's house burned down in 1970. The cause of the fire was a mystery, but the house was thoroughly destroyed, leaving only the charred remains. After being purchased by the county, the Junior League of St. Augustine raised $1.2 million to restore the lighthouse to its glory. Workers performing the renovations reported experiencing ghost-like phenomena in the basement. Junior League volunteers also claimed to have seen or heard activity of young children playing. On one particular evening, a staff member at the lighthouse was locking up for the night when he heard a child giggling. Worried someone was still in the lighthouse, he went up the stairs to check, and nobody was there. After a moment, he went back down the stairs when he heard the giggling again. The St. Augustine Lighthouse and Maritime Museum offers the Dark of the Moon ghost tours at the lighthouse. On one evening, a guest on the tour was standing on the first step of the metal staircase inside the lighthouse. After starting to climb, she had trouble moving one of her feet. When she looked down, her shoelace had been tied to the staircase. A ghostly prank of a child? Paranormal investigators have attempted to find the ghosts at the lighthouse as well. One guest at the lighthouse was found in the basement with an EMF meter to measure electrical activity from ghosts or spirits. The woman asked the spirits, "Do you want to play hide and seek?" Her EMF meter lit up. She continued to investigate, walking through the structure. When her meter lit up again near the staircase, she claimed she had found the girls. She repeated her question, and again the meter peaked. She repeated again until another group entered the space and all went quiet. Some have claimed to see full-bodied apparitions of the girls, while others claim to hear children playing, or as we heard, giggling. Others report silly pranks or things out of place. In recent years, a guest at the museum claims to have seen a young Victorian girl reading a book on a bench, but the girl suddenly vanished. Another guest on a tour complimented another guest on the behavior of her daughter. Confused, the woman replied, "I have no daughter." Others on the tour say there was a little girl standing by the woman during the tour, but according to the guide that night, there was no girl on the tour. The parlor is also a frequent site of activity. Staff and guests have reported hearing a man coughing while the room was empty. It is thought to be the ghost of William Harn. He was one of the first lighthouse keepers, and Harn died in the lighthouse of tuberculosis and malaria following the American Civil War. The television series Ghost Hunters visited the lighthouse as part of their series on the A&E network. In the episode, the team of investigators used motion-sensing devices that continually were being set off, despite nobody being near the devices. Sightings and reports continue to this day. Some people claim they were followed. Others hear voices. The figure of a little girl in a red dress has been seen in the upstairs window of the tower, and small, dirty footprints have been found inside the building. A man in a blue suit has been frequently seen in the basement, and some have even seen and smelled cigar smoke. This man is believed to be Peter Rasmussen, the lighthouse keeper from 1901 to 1924. Rasmussen had the longest stint of any lighthouse keeper at the lighthouse, and he was a cigar smoker. The St. Augustine Lighthouse is considered one of the most haunted places in the United States, and perhaps the most haunted lighthouse in the world. Are these mysterious stories to be believed? You'll have to decide that for yourself. Thank you so much for listening to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs was written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried, and you can follow him at Sean Secret on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and until next time, keep your doors locked and the lights on.